Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the JDSN Seminar 2024-2025, which is centered on the theme Addiction and the Human Condition, Philosophical Perspective and Questions. To begin our seminar, let us invoke the divine and seek the blessings through the prayer song. May I now invite the choir to lead us in the prayer song.
Reaching out to those in need, servant of the poor, now you send me as your sign of love for all humanity. And I will walk on holy ground. I'll hear your voice and see your face. I will find you in the crowd. Lord, I will go where you will lead me. I will walk on holy ground. You are here, here beside me, Lord. In the cries of all the hungry and the homeless, you are there. In the eyes of both forsaken and forgotten, you are there. In my fears and in my failures, in the silent depths of my own poverty, you are there. I will walk on holy ground. I'll hear your voice and see your face. I will find you in the crowd. Lord, I will go where you will lead me. I will walk on holy ground. I will walk on holy ground.
Thank you, dear friends, for putting us in a prayerful mood through your melodious singing. To officially welcome the gathering for today's seminar, I now invite Brother Manish to deliver the welcome address.
A very good afternoon and a happy Philosophy Day to you all. Respected Father Nishant Irudayadasan, Dean of the Philosophy Faculty, present here, fathers, sisters, and my dear friends. It is with great pleasure that I welcome you all to the JDSN Seminar 2024. On the occasion of the World Philosophy Day, this afternoon, we are gathered here to enrich our knowledge, perspectives, and understanding about various forms of addictions. This JDSN seminar is combination of both Gyanadipa Institute of Philosophy and Theology, Pune, and Satya Nilayam Institute of Philosophy, Chennai. In our midst, we have 10 outstanding speakers from Satya Nilayam Institute of Philosophy, Chennai. We welcome them all. We warmly welcome Father Joel, who prepared and animating them tirelessly. We also welcome 10 eminent speakers from Gyanadipa Philosophy Faculty. I assure you that each presenter will provide with some new information, valuable lesson, innovative ideas, and aspirations for lives. Thank you for being here, and let's make this JDSN seminar a memorable and impactful experience. Once again, hearty welcome to you all.
To set the stage for the discussions ahead, we have a brief video that provides an overview of the seminar, highlighting its theme and presentations. So let's watch it now. May I now invite Professor Dr. Nishant Irudayadasan, the Dean of Philosophy Department, to share his profound insight on the philosophical dimension of addiction and the human condition, formally marking the beginning of this inaugural seminar. Please join me in welcoming Professor Dr. Nishant.
I'm not going to present a philosophical treatise on this topic that others will do for the next this afternoon, tomorrow as well. I'm here to just give a brief inaugural address, also as part of explaining how it began and where we have reached with this partnership that we have with Satyanilayam. Distinguished guests, esteemed rectors and superiors of formation communities on campus, respected faculty members, and my dear students. Though Manish had given you a formal welcome, on my behalf, I would like to welcome each one of you to this year's JDSN Student Seminar with a great sense of honor and gratitude. Of course, a special word of welcome to all the delegates from Satyanilayam under the able faculty leadership of our own Joel, who is here with us, and all the 10 students who have come to present papers. Your presence here today speaks of the shared vision and collaboration that have always defined the relationship between Jnanadeepa and Satyanilayam. Therefore, today's event is not merely an event, but a celebration of a vibrant academic partnership that has grown and evolved over time. Many of you may not know this partnership began nearly a decade ago, but when we began, the initiative was partnership between the teaching faculty to present papers on one common agreed theme. And I think we had two such conferences. One was hosted in Satyanilayam and the next one here. And of course, we also published the fruits of this conference. However, as time progresses with so many demands made on us academically, slowly there was a bit of hiatus in this collaboration. So we thought this has reached its natural conclusion, but just like the phoenix bird rose, this effort was resurrected 6 years ago with a renewed focus and a firm commitment to fostering student contributions from both institutions. Since the academic year 2018-19, this JDSN Student Conference or seminar has become the platform for our students from both faculties to engage in meaningful dialogue, exchange ideas, and explore the pressing questions of our time. Accordingly, in the year 2018-19, the first JDSN Student Seminar was held in Satyanilayam on the theme Artificial Intelligence and Human Beings. Unfortunately, with the outbreak of COVID-19 pandemic, this was held in suspended animation for the next 2 years. Again, in the academic year 2022-23, the Faculty of Philosophy at Jnanadeepa hosted this conference on the theme Beyond the Binaries, Gender Identity and Philosophy. And last academic year, the same seminar was hosted by Satyanilayam on the theme Shadow of Power, Philosophical Perspectives on Violence and Politics. So we know that this collaboration has enriched both institutions, and the papers presented in all these last 3 years have been published in our JD Philosophy series. Of course, we are in partnership with Christian World Imprints, as many of you probably know. This year, we focus on a relevant and challenging theme, addiction and human condition, philosophical perspectives and questions. Addiction in its various forms, substance dependency, behavioral compulsions, or the pervasive hold of digital technology, touches every aspect of human existence. Flourishing or eudaimonia. What does it mean to be truly free in a world where addictions bind us? How do we understand the interplay of personal responsibility and systemic factors in addressing this condition? Can philosophy offer critical insights and pathways to healing and hope? These are some of the pressing questions that I hope the paper presenters will explore today and tomorrow. I commend the students who have prepared papers on this theme. Your efforts reflect your intellectual rigor and courage to confront one of the most pressing issues of our time with clarity and understanding. Let me take this opportunity to extend my heartfelt thanks to the dedicated faculty coordinators who have made this event possible. Dr. Dolachan Kolarath from our own faculty and Father Joel from Satyanilayam Sacred Heart College. Your tireless efforts, guidance, and commitment to fostering collaboration between these two faculties have been the bedrock of this initiative. I also wish to thank the class representatives and the many student volunteers whose behind-the-scenes work has ensured the seamless organization of today's and tomorrow's conference. And of course, I must also mention the melodious singing of the choir. It was very divinely, isn't it? Yeah, great. Thank you. You began on a very, very nice note, this conference, and I'm sure that you'll have a lasting impact. Your contributions are invaluable, and this event would not have been possible without every student of the Faculty of Philosophy. At the same time, I invite all of you to be present for all the sessions and also actively participate with open minds and generous hearts. May this seminar deepen our understanding on this theme, and more than that, it also strengthen the bonds of friendship and intellectual camaraderie between these two faculties. I wish you all an enriching and thought-provoking seminar. May God bless you.
Thank you, Professor Dr. Nishant, for your thought-provoking message. Now, we move on to the first session of the seminar, which consists of 3 papers. The moderator for this session is Brother Joshua, a first-year licentiate student at Jnana Deepa, Pune. May I now invite Brother Joshua to take over.
Good afternoon, everyone, and once again, welcome to the first session of JDSN Seminar 2024, Addiction and Human Condition. This afternoon, we will be exposed to 3 papers. These papers will examine addiction through various lenses, including biological, psychological, social, and philosophical perspectives. Central theme of these papers is the understanding that addiction is not merely a personal failing, but a complex interplay of genetical, neurobiological, and socio-cultural influences. Additionally, philosophical inquiries into concepts like free will and identity highlight how addiction can reflect deeper existential struggles. The papers advocate for a nuanced view that recognizes the true nature of addiction through comprehensive strategies for prevention and treatment, both individually and as a society. This is to the presenters. Just to remind ourselves about the guidelines of the program, each presentation will be given 14 minutes. There will be a warning bell at the 12th minute and a closing bell at the 14th minute. I request the presenters to stick to the given time. Once all 3 presentations are done, we will have a panel discussion for 30 minutes based on the presentations made. The floor will be open for questions and insights from the audience. Moving on to the first paper. The first paper we will be seeing is titled Biology and Psychology of Addiction. It is authored by 2 final year philosophers of Satyanilayam, Rohan and Richin. Rohan has a BSc in Hospitality and Hotel Administration. Richin has a BA in English Literature. Both of them belong to the Society of Jesus. Now let us have Richin to enlighten us.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is Scholastic Richie from Satyanilayam. Today we will be discussing on the paper on addiction, its psychological foundations and pathways to recover. Let us understand what the addiction is. According to the World Health Organization, addiction is a chronic disorder characterized by an inability to stop using a substance or engaging in a behavior despite harmful consequences. What leads us to addiction? There are 4 pathways that draw individuals to addiction. First, there is occasional use. Then people start using regularly. Then they can't do without it, so they are independent on the substance. And finally, they are into the category of addicted people. How addiction changes brain? Think of an reprogramming of a computer, but here it's a brain. When we are indulged into addictive behaviors, our thinking pattern changes. For example, a person addicted to gambling might skip important family events because their brain reward system has been altered to prioritize gambling over these crucial life aspects. Let's break down how we learn addictive behaviors. There are 2 psychological theories that are presented in this paper, classical conditioning and operant conditioning. Classical conditioning, discovered by Pavlov, explains why certain triggers become powerful cues. For example, an addicted person passing by a liquor shop thinks of drinking. Operant conditioning is where B.F. Skinner shows us how consequences shape our behavior. So this is solely based on reward and punishment. So when people drink alcohol just for the sake of relaxing, they get reward, and for enhancing their euphoric experiences, they take alcohol and make it up for the sadness that they have. There are also social and cognitive theories. In cognitive theories, people keep thinking there are harmful thought patterns that people have, and that makes them addictive. For example, I can't handle situations without drinking. I need this medicine to go to sleep. There's no other way. Gaming is the only thing that brings me happiness. It also has a social effect, behavior effect through observation and limitations. For example, teenagers start smoking because of the peer pressure, and this leads to an dependency, and then there is a addiction. There are key factors and personality traits that we have added in this paper are impulsivity. An individual thinks just one more drink I can take and it won't harm me. Sensation seeking. Despite many problems, people want to have euphoric experiences, especially youngsters want to try something new, and then they have this trait. Emotional dysregulation. Imagine someone who turns to substance every time they feel stress, creating a pattern where they never learn healthy coping mechanism. Mental health and disorder in addiction. We have added anxiety disorders, where when person takes drugs just for the sake of having social courage so that he can participate in a function or in a party. Having depression, individuals with depression may use substance to self-medicate their feelings of hopelessness and sadness. Someone with depression might use stimulants to counter their fatigue or low mood. Bipolar disorder. This is mainly on mood swings. When a person feels too high, he goes on to take substances and gets into addictive behaviors. When he's feeling too low, he may think of drinking to enhance his behavior or enhance his feelings. Are there pathways to whether there are pathways to recover from addiction. There are therapies, for example, cognitive behavioral therapy, which helps us to change our thinking pattern. There are medicines which help us to withdrawal symptoms management. Support groups provide community of shared understanding. Roles of motivation. Internal motivation support and supports from friends and family and community are crucial to overcome an addiction. Now I call over Rohan to move forward.
Good afternoon, friends. My name is Rohan, and I'm a second-year philosopher. So thank you, Richin, for presenting the psychological side of addictions. Now I'll go ahead with the biological basis. So as we can see over here, the genetic influences which affect addiction, and in specific, we are talking about how people's genes, and in genes, there are certain variations of those genes which affect us and make us more susceptible to addiction. So there can be different people who are having almost the same chromosomes, one from the parent, which is male, and another from the female. And in them, even in the case of identical twins, in whom most of the genes are the same, yet there can be some variants, and because of these variants, one particular twin can be more addicted, whereas the other won't. Now, this is all biology. Let us move forward and get into the details. So first of all, as Richin mentioned, addiction is a compulsive behavior where you lose control, and it goes to such an extent that you start harming yourself, and in spite of that, you cannot stop. And the reason, like, although I will be looking into the biological, we have already seen the psychological, there are also social reasons for this. So there are three major reasons that we are looking at. Now, we are highlighting three main gene mutations or gene variants. The first one is the DRD2 gene variation. Now, this is linked with dopamine signaling. Basically, it is telling the mind how much to produce, how much dopamine, which is also known as the pleasure drive, has to be produced. The second thing that it does is, it is the reward processing. So when Richin was speaking about something known as the operant conditioning by B.F. Skinner, this method tells us about the conditioning that is applied. For example, you have a dog, and when you provide food for the dog salivates. Now you start ringing a bell, and even if the food is not there, the dog knows that when the bell is rung, he has to come for the food. When the dog does something good, you provide more food, which is positive reinforcement. At the same time, if you reduce something which is good for the dog, which he likes, it is negative reinforcement. So this is where the reward processing comes in. We understand that this particular thing gives me pleasure, and this is the thing that I want to avoid. This is reward processing. Now, in the people where this gene variant affects their susceptibility, basically, either your body is not able to know how much of dopamine to produce, or it is not able to connect properly the reward system. And because of that, you need external factors or external stimulants, which can come in the form of cocaine and alcohol. Now, most of us might be aware that there are two kinds of drugs, one which are suppressants and one which get you a high. So, depending on what either you are lacking or there is more, you will look for that particular kind of drug if your gene variant is susceptible to that. The second thing is the COMT gene. Now, in dopamine, there is something known as dopamine metabolism, where basically your body is breaking it down. Now, what happens, I can explain with an example of a bucket. Imagine that water is pouring into a bucket and there are holes in this bucket. Now, if there is too much water and there are few holes, there is excess of dopamine which is there. At the same time, if you invert this situation, and if there is little water or normal water, but the holes are bigger, you are getting drained from your dopamine very quickly. And in both these situations, you will have to require either you will have too much dopamine or you will have too low. So this is the COMT gene variation. Now, another important aspect, which we will go a little more in detail also, will be the environmental factors. Environmental factors will basically be the upbringing of the person, the family background, the parents, the friends, and other things. Now, there is also something known as the CHRNA5 variant. This deals with nicotine. So there is something known as receptors which are in our mind. So when dopamine is produced, it is sent to these receptors, it stays, and then it is brought back. So the amount of duration for which it should remain on those receptors is modulated. But when nicotine takes over, it keeps it there for a long time and you get extended pleasure. And that is the reason once you get used to this pleasure, then you want it more and more. So one more cigarette. Now, since your level has gone up, you cannot come down from there. So that is to do with this variant. Neurotransmitters are of two types. There is dopamine, there is also serotonin. Dopamine is the pleasure drive. Serotonin is what is known as the happiness drive. So basically, it has the potential to make you more vulnerable. A variant which affects your genes can make you more vulnerable, and even the environmental factors adding to this can either make you more susceptible or even less. So for example, a person having a healthy upbringing may be less susceptible even though the gene variants might be the ones which are making him susceptible. Okay. Now, usual dopamine reward therapy. So the pathway would be when you exercise or you play games or you read, there is a certain limit to which your body will do this, and you will get a particular amount of high, and then after that it will be drained and you will come back naturally. However, there are also certain other alternatives like, for example, alcohol, there is drugs, there is addictive foods, there is video games, or there are mobile phones. In this, you will go to a new level of high, but you are affecting your body and it will have consequences on your body. Eventually, you will feel drained, but at the same time, since you are used to this, you will again want to go back to that level. If you look at the environmental interactions, basically, say two children who are in different families, one who is susceptible, the other one who is not so susceptible. But in this particular person who is more susceptible, the family is good. So in that case, he will be having a healthy upbringing and that will affect him less. Whereas in the other case, it will be the other way around. And finally, coming to the role of epigenetics. So inside your DNA, there is a particular information which has markers based on which your cells produce proteins. So the proteins decide what has to be done, whether a cancerous cell should be allowed or not. And this depends on the epigenetics, which goes on through generations. So either this can take you for the positive or it can take you for the negative. And this, if you see cheap and real dopamine, these are the natural ways to come out of it, or the unnatural which can get you addicted. But at the same time, based on future research, if you have positive thoughts, a good environment, good diet, good exercise, good rest, natural dopamines, then it can even heal you. Your epigenetics will start reading the positive information and it can heal. The aim was to prove a connection between the biological, psychological, and social basis, which we have done, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Richin and Rohan, for the presentation. You have shown us what are the pathways that are leading us to addiction and the pathways that are leading us out from the addiction. Thank you so much for the wonderful presentation. Up next, we have a paper titled Brain and Addiction, an overview of neural transformation in addiction, written by Jonathan and Bibi, both students of Satyanilayam. Jonathan is in his final year and Bibi in his first year. Jonathan has a BSc in mathematics and Bibi has a BA in English literature. Both belong to the Society of Jesus. Let us welcome Jonathan to put forth their ideas.
So good afternoon. The topic that I'm dealing with is understanding the brain and addiction. It is an overview of the neural transformations in addiction. The presentation overview contains of addiction, its causes, the brain and addiction, the chemicals that are released, and the nature of overcoming addiction, whether it's free will or neurobiological conditioning. Addiction, in simple terms, is being enslaved or bound to something. As already defined, World Health Organization defines it as something which you crave for as a neurobiological disease, which involves a compulsive drug abuse in spite of the adverse consequences. And when I speak or use the term disease, it is a disruption of the normal functioning. What are the causes of addictions? There are 10 to 12 causes, but if I want to put it in one sentence, these are your socio-economic opportunities. Socio will include your social ties, your feeling towards oneself and the others, and economics will not only include your wealth, but also the opportunities and goals that you have in life. When I introduce this topic, I will give a systemic refutation of free will to show that understanding addiction only as free will is something simple, but addiction is more complex. Hannah Pickard, she defines addiction using two terms, that is internal and external constraints. What are internal constraints? Your values, your decision making, your reasoning, your judgment. You can have control over this. But what are the external constraints? Your health, your socio-economic opportunities, feeling towards oneself and the other, which also includes your mental health. So you don't have a control over this. Take, for example, a person who is addicted. He may make a choice, an internal constraint, that, okay, I will leave alcohol or certain drugs. But there will be external constraints on him that will make him or influence his internal constraints. And that is why what Hannah Pickard says in conclusion, that complete autonomy requires a complete free will over the internal and external constraints. One may have complete autonomy over internal constraints, but not over external constraints which influence your internal constraints. So complete autonomy over addiction is ruled out. Then I move on to the addiction and the brain. First, I define what is the reward circuit. Different names have been given as the reward circuit, the emotional part of the brain, or it is also known as the pleasure center or the dopamine pathway. It is situated at the mid portion of the brain. Now, what happens when we engage in certain activities? The brain takes a note of it and helps us to engage into activities which are rewarding or pleasurable. Now, the brain's reward circuit is made up of certain parts. Those are hippocampus, the hypothalamus, and the amygdala. It also contains the ventral tegmental area, the nucleus accumbens, and the limbic system. Now, the ventral tegmental area is a site for dopamine-producing neurons. The nucleus accumbens is for the transmission of signals to and fro. And as I defined, the limbic system, which is in the form of a ring, has hippocampus, which is associated with memories, the amygdala with emotions, and the hypothalamus with hormones. And when I defined memories, emotions, and hormones, I am dealing with the addictive experiences. This diagram shows additional thing, that is the prefrontal cortex. The ventromedial prefrontal cortex is involved in our decision making. Usually when we say that a person has not emotionally matured till the age of 20 or 21, is because this portion of the brain is developing. Now, what are the certain prerequisites that we need to remember is of neurons, neurotransmitter, and dopamine as a neurotransmitter. Neuron, in simple language, is a specialized cell in the nervous system, which is the building block of a brain. Neurotransmitters are chemical messengers in the brain, which transmit signals. And dopamine, as already defined, is a neurotransmitter in the brain associated with feelings of pleasure, reward, and motivation. It also contributes to movement, memory, attention, and learning. So to conclude, I would say neurotransmitters are chemical messengers that neurons use in communication process. Neurons can be compared to a medium, whereas neurotransmitters are the chemical impulses. Then I define the ideal human nature. The ideal human nature is basically to seek happiness, pleasure, and reward. And all of our actions, behaviors, and dispositions are inclined towards this ideal. That is why we indulge in activities seeking pleasure and reward, in spite of a possibility of negative consequences. Then I move next to the drug interference in the neurotransmitter mechanism. First is a transmission process. The ventral tegmentum area of the brain, which is a site for the dopamine producing neurons, sends electrochemical signals and messages to the axons of the nucleus accumbens. During this process, dopamine gets ejaculated in the synapses. Synapses are gaps between two neurons. The neuron before the synaptic gap is called presynaptic neuron, and the one after that is postsynaptic. So dopamine travels from the presynaptic to the postsynaptic, which serves as a presynaptic to the other postsynaptic neuron. Now, what is the role of the postsynaptic neuron? The postsynaptic neuron acts or reacts and engages into activities based on the nature of the neurotransmitter. A neurotransmitter can be of two natures. One is excitatory, like glutamate. Then the postsynaptic neuron will be excited, and this will promote active messaging among the neurons, leading to learning, memory, and active cognitive functions of the brain. On the other hand, if the neurotransmitter is of an inhibitory nature, like gamma aminobutyric acid, it will reduce neuronal excitability. This will reduce the neuronal firing, leading to calmness and relaxation. Now, what is the role of the transporter molecule? The transporter molecule has to take back the neurotransmitter that has carried out its action, which is either of the excitatory or inhibitory nature. In other cases, released neurotransmitter is broken up by enzymes. The aim is to avoid the neurotransmitter from prolonging its stay into the postsynaptic neuron. This may lead to the prolongation of the desirable effects of the neurotransmitter. Now, how does the drug affect the brain? It helps in increasing the dopamine. Certain drugs force the presynaptic cell to secrete increased amount of the neurotransmitter than in the case of secretions under normal circumstances. When the dopamine is released into the postsynaptic neuron, and after it has carried out its function, it has to be taken back. But what the drug does is prevents this reuptake. And there are certain drugs, like amphetamines. These have a reversal effect. The normal function of reuptake is blocked by this drug, whereas it also persuades the transporter in pumping excess amount of dopamine into the synapse from the presynaptic cell. And other drugs like opioids, nicotine, ethanol, and many others show a similar reversal effect by firing excess dopamine in the ventral tegmental area. Now, why does one get habituated to drugs? Normally, our brains are programmed in such a way that when we engage in life-sustaining activities which are pleasurable or rewarding, we want to do it again and again. It is the same in the drug mechanism process. The brain teaches us to do that activity again and again without thinking about it. Because drugs of abuse stimulate the same circuit, we learn to abuse drugs in the same way. Now, what is the nature of drugs in contrast to natural rewards? First is it secretes dopamine 2 to 10 times. Then the secretion is immediate and it has a lasting effect. And what are the consequences? There is a pleasure reduction. Imagine hearing to a loud noise. The ear adapts itself. In a similar way, the brain adjusts to the overwhelming surges of dopamine and other neurotransmitters by producing less dopamine and by reducing the number of receptors that can receive signals. As a result, dopamine's impact on the reward circuit of the brain of someone who abuses drugs can become abnormally low, and that person's ability to experience any pleasure is reduced. What are the consequences of this? A person who abuses drugs feels flat, lifeless, and depressed, and is unable to enjoy things that were previously pleasurable. Now the person needs to keep taking drugs again and again just to try and bring his or her dopamine function back up to normal, which only makes the problem worse. And also the person will often need to take larger amounts of the drug to produce the familiar dopamine high, an effect known as tolerance. The question comes, can addiction be treated successfully? Yes, but can it be cured permanently? No. Why is it so? Because it involves certain medications or drugs which will do the reversal roles. Now there are 3 stages. One is treating withdrawal. In the first stage, a person will have physical and emotional symptoms, including depression, anxiety, and other mood disorders. So there are certain antidepressants like sertraline, venlafaxine, and beta blockers. What they will do, they will produce another neurotransmitter, that is serotonin, which will combat the negative consequences, which is associated with mood. Second is staying into treatment. And there are certain drugs, like again varenicline, which will reduce cravings. And there is also lofexidine, which is involved for opioid withdrawal and its cravings. And the last stage is preventing relapse. What has science taught us? That stress and experiences, such as people, things, and moods, and exposure to drugs are the most common triggers for relapse. And medications are being developed to interfere with these triggers to help patients sustain recovery. And what are the medications to treat the drugs? For tobacco, we have bupropion and varenicline. For opioid, we have methadone and naltrexone. And again, for alcohol and drug addiction, we have naltrexone and dulciferam and acamprostate. So finally, I conclude by saying that when an addiction is involved, it is not merely a process of free will. We cannot blame the person entirely for his choices. There are certain disruptions in the functioning of the brain, and this can be cured only by taking certain drugs which will reverse the effect, and this is a continued process. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan and Bibi, for the presentation. It helped us to understand how addiction and recovery are intrinsically connected to neural activities. The final presentation of this session is titled Humans Are Condemned to be Addicted by Karis and Vishal, philosophy students of Jnanadeepa. Karis is in his final year and Vishal second year. Karis has an MTech in safety engineering and Vishal has a BA in English literature. Karis and Vishal both belong to the Society of Jesus. Let us welcome Karis to present their ideas.
Good afternoon, friends. Humans are condemned to be addicted. Addiction as an inevitable part of human nature. This is our topic, and we go through these stages. We will introduce the topic and the history and different perspectives, and we will define the addiction and habits, and through the philosophical determinism, we will come to know about, we will argue for how humans are inevitable for addiction, and we will, at the end, as a solution or as a, what is the practical solution, what we can do to transform the addictions into positive habits, and we will conclude the session. Usually, when addictions are considered, addiction is considered as a moral failure, or addictions as the result of a addictive personality. That is a common notion. But we cannot blame the person alone for addiction. There are complex interplay of genetic, neurological, and psychological and environmental factors involved in the addiction. And the research indicates that 95% of our brain activity is unconscious activities. If you look at the history, and humans have an inherent addictive tendency that leads them to addiction, which are either we can categorize into positive addictions as well as negative addictions, which we will explain later. And we need to have the compassionate approach towards the addictive personalities, because addiction is a fundamental human experience arising from the inevitable part of human life. And addiction is an inherent challenge, but it can be transformed. If you look at the history, most of our philosophy starts from the Plato Aristotle time. Plato himself, while making the tripartite soul concepts, he said that there is a conflict between rationality, emotions, and basic needs. This can be a cause for the addictive behaviors. And when it comes to Freud, he said that addictions as a coping strategy for the anxiety or internal conflicts. When it comes to B.F. Skinner, he talked about reward and punishments, and which can lead to the addictions. And if you look at the latest neuroscience studies that talks about the addictions and its brain neural wirings and all. And when it comes to genetic factors, recently the study shows that 50 to 60% of the addictions are from the genetic causes also. And existential perspectives also suggest or claims that addictions comes out of the meaningless or existential crises. So our argument is like, here, if you look at the history, mostly these things are considered compartmentalized by considering addiction as biological cause alone or psychological cause alone or social cause alone. So we need to have a holistic perspective by integrating all these factors, and we need to understand the inherent tendency of humans leading to addictions and habits. So now we are arguing for addiction and habits which are inherently same. What is its similarities? What is its difference? Addictions usually considered as chronic and repetitive and compulsive. Loss of control is there, and relapsing impacts are there, and it is having physical, social, and psychological harms are its effects. Example, if you use alcohol, drugs, or if you watch pornography, those impacts are there, and it is considered as almost these all effects are considered as a negative impacts. But when it comes to habits, like addiction, habits is also chronic and repetitive, and it is also unconscious and automatic, and it can be having positive as well as neutral effect. This is the only difference between the habits and the addictions. Like we are taking morning coffee regularly, checking messages frequently, checking phones, biting nails, exercises, brushing, etc. These are habits, but it is also having the same mechanism as the addiction. Both are repetitive and unconscious in nature, only differ in their effect or consequences. So we would like to argue that, and habit as a positive addiction. Through that, we can say that humans will either come under positive addiction or positive addiction or negative addiction. And we know that 95% of our activities are unconscious. So we will be doing most of the activities which comes under habits or comes under addiction. So this is our main argument to argue for the inevitable nature of humans. So now we are trying to understand the addictions and habits from the through the lens of philosophical determinism. When we look at the philosophical determinism, we know that there is a causal connection between for all our actions, which stems from our biological dispositions or psychological dispositions or social situatedness or our existential perspectives. if you look at the biological mechanism, the addictions also have that. Whenever I say addiction, it will be mostly I say that it is a negative addiction, and whenever I use the term habits, it will be considered as the positive addiction. So the addiction have that dopamine overstimulation, which causes the addiction, and the positive habits also involves this dopamines which releases during our habits, during the activities which we normally or unconsciously do. Another genetic factors also, if you look at the researchers, identical twins who are raised in different environments showed similar smoking habits, indicating strong genetic components in our addictive behaviors, or the addictive which leads to our addictive behaviors. And if we look at the other positive habits, identical twins were more likely to share the similar patterns of the physical activities they do. If we look at the another biological mechanism, the neurological predispositions, our brains are having neural connections, which happens both in addictions as well as in the positive habits. Brain becomes conditioned to expect a reward after a certain behaviors, and persons feel compelled to repeat the action. Example, gambling. If you look at the positive habits, brain rewires the supporting healthy routines with the consistency. If we play regularly basketball, we have the tendency to play again and again. So that comes from the neurological or brain connection. As coping mechanism, addictions and habit arises as a response to our emotional states such as desires, passion, stress, trauma. Both addictions as well as habits comes from these things. Cope our traumatic experiences, or if you look at the positive habits, we have the tendency to need to love or to be loved, which leads to certain habits which recurs due to our psychological factors. Now coming to the environmental and social factors, there are context-dependent addictions. If you look at the examples, during the Vietnam War, the soldiers were addicted to drugs when they were in the Vietnam. But when they came back to the their homeland America, they ceased to use the drugs because of that. So we can see the social or environmental impact in causing the addiction. And if we look at the positive habits also, there is if you have good friends who are good family members or siblings who do regularly exercise, and we will ask for mutual support, that will cultivate the positive habits in our life. And we also need to look into the addictions which stems from the social pressure, the capitalistic society, and the exploitation which stems from the throwaway culture. Now come to the existential perspective. Existential situations and pursuits leads to addictions or habits. Addictions as a coping mechanism for isolation, despair, or lack of purpose, which these things will lead us to the negative habits or negative addictions, which will have negative impact in us. And if you look at positive habits, which stems from the existential perspectives, like we will go for the habits or behaviors which provides meaning and direction to our life. So we argue that from the philosophical deterministic perspective, that we are inherently disposed to the addiction, either in positive addiction or in negative addiction. But we are arguing for a soft determinism or compatibilism, which supports our free will also, the soft determinism or compatibilism argues that there are causal factors which leads to our behaviors and patterns, but we can there is a role of our free will which can, using its desires, change these patterns. So, in order to face this inevitable nature of addiction as our human experience, we need to transform these addictions into positive habits. For that, we need to identify the triggers, and we need to substitute our actions, and we need to celebrate our progress with the small rewards. Initially, we might need to force ourselves to exercise. But after a few weeks, our brain begins to associate physical activity with the release of dopamines and endorphins, which leads to change our negative habits or negative addiction into positive addiction. And as we told in the beginning itself, addiction, we cannot blame the person. There are social influences. So in order to overcome or change from our negative addiction to the positive addiction, we need the social support also. The peer pressure and materialism or social media validations, those things need to be brought down, and the positive driving factors like supporting community, mentorship, or wellness trends, these need to be given to the addictive personalities, and we need to promote call for action by the societal norms or encouraging into the positive addictions like fitness, volunteering, or engaging in the creative activities. So, what is the implications for the society? The society need to encourage and develop policies to support the community-based programs for habit transformation from negative addiction to positive addictions. And society need to address the stigma by reframing addictions as a human challenge and not as a human failure. In conclusion, we argue that addiction is not a moral failure, but it is an inevitable part of human nature, and we cannot condemn persons for addictions. There is a complex interplay of genetic, neurological, psychological, and environmental factors involved in addictive behaviors. We need to have a compassionate approach to focus on recovery, nourishing habits, and support environments. Addiction is an inherent challenge, but it can be transformed. Thank you.
Thank you, Karis and Vishal, for explaining the similarity and difference between addiction and habits from an existential perspective. Now we shall move on to the panel discussion. Shall we have all the participants on the stage for the panel discussion? Now the floor is open for questions. Your questions may be directed to one particular presentation, or it can even be in general to which any of the panel members will answer. I request the audience to put forth their questions, and if you are willing to offer new insights, please be precise and to the point.
My question is directed to Karis and his partner Vishal. First of all, I would like to thank you for the wonderful presentation which you have given. And my question is that you said addiction can be a fruit of coping mechanism. So when you say it's positive addiction, negative addiction, I don't understand what you're trying to mean, because I feel that When some of them say that reading is a positive habit, is a good habit. But sometimes, as C.W. Lewis says, I read to know that I am not alone. When I am lonely, I go to reading. So it can be addiction. Can't it be a negative addiction? So even alcoholism also comes like that. When I am alone, I go take alcohol. So how do we differentiate between positive, negative habits, addiction? Can you be a little more, throw a little bit light on that?
When we say that positive addiction and negative addiction, it only differs in the impact which made. And sometimes we need to keep in mind that this positive effect or negative effect may not be decided by ourselves. It can be decided by the society itself. Some say that addiction, addicted to books, can be, some can argue that it is a positive addiction. But sometimes if we escape from the reality and addicted to reading books, and then it become a negative addiction, which is because he is trying to escape from the reality by the existential crisis he is having. So there is a difference in positive addiction as well as negative addiction. And another thing is, when we are addicted, we are having the same mechanism for the positive addiction as well as negative addiction. That is our argument. Because that makes it is inevitable part of human nature.
Thank you, Karis. I would like to remind the audience to introduce yourself before you pose your questions. Over there, please.
My name is Shamu. I'm studying third year philosophy. So my question to Karis, who presented well. So you made a statement like this. We cannot just conclude that addiction is not addiction. So my question, is it a kind of escapism? Because if it is not addiction, we can call it as a habitual action. So what is your opinion for that?
So firstly, he kind of like tried to differentiate between positive habit and addiction. Now, when we say addiction, as he said earlier as well, it implies some kind of negative implications, and those negative implications can be harmful for the person as well as to the society sometimes. So if it's a positive habit, if it is a habit, so it will not have any negative implications. And when we talk about addiction, we also need to consider that it is not just a kind of person is not just giving into addiction, but there are like some social, psychological, and biological factors that compel the person to give into addiction. And therefore, as a result, there are like negative implications. But if it's a habit, it does not have any negative implications. I hope I have answered your question. If not, please clarify again.
So okay, well answered. So my question, if we can't blame people, is it actually addicted? That's my question.
Can you repeat the question?
See, you said that we cannot blame the people. That we cannot condemn. Your topic is okay. But my question, if we cannot be addicted, then what is actually? Because if I think that I can stop it, so if I want, I can begin also. So in that case, how can it be addicted? That's my question.
If you look at a person, he is either comes under most of 95% or actions are unconscious, and it will either come under habits or come under negative addictions. Habits is having positive impacts, and addictions is having negative impacts. So, and you are predisposed biologically, psychologically, and existentially predisposed for the addiction, genetically also. So these things leading a person towards addiction. And you have the free will also. You can use the free will and come to either of these two categories alone, either in positive addiction or in your negative addiction. So that is the only choice left for you.
I think Vishal and Caris have made it clear the difference between positive and negative addiction and how it is determined by individual and the society. So we'll be moving on. Next question.
Yes. So the third paper was arguing that human beings are condemned to be addicted. I would like to know what the other two papers, how would they respond to that claim, that thesis? Because both the papers also presented from a biological point of view, from a neural point of view, and so on. Would you agree from what you have studied from a biological neural point of view, the claim made in the third paper, what would be your agreements and what would be your disagreements? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. So basically, if I have to argue from a genetic point of view, see, as we know that we are born with a certain genes in our body, about which actually we cannot do anything before we are born. So if I have a gene which makes me susceptible, then yes, I am susceptible to addiction. At the same time, I agree with compatibilism, the reason being, as I mentioned even during the paper, there are certain habits which can help me through my epigenetics, genetically speaking. So they can help my genes to read a particular kind of information which has either a positive or a negative marker. If my gene reads a healthy information positively, then it is reading and acting on it. So through that, I can even come out of that addiction. At the same time, if I am in a state where I am not doing anything to come out of it, and if it remains as it is and it is not reading it, then I will be stuck in addiction. So that is my point of view.
Answering to the question whether humans are condemned or not, I would like to bring in three factors. First is indeterminism, and a food for thought is whether indeterminism is real. As far as I see, indeterminism is ideal, as the existentialist, including Albert Camus, would say that okay, nothing is determined. We are in a world and we can define our own actions. It is hardly possible in today's age because everything is determined. There may be psychological factors, there may be physiological factors, which my companion Rohan defined. There may be environmental factors, and there may be also theological factors, which includes our beliefs in a system, in a culture, a belief in God, in the divine being. So taking that point of view and also bringing in a point from my presentation of the British philosopher and psychologist Hannah Pickard, I would say that humans are somewhat condemned. Why? Because when the external constraints come in, they have to get into the process because the human desire is to seek happiness and reward and to come out of the negativity and moral tensions. For people like us, we would see addiction in terms of morality, but for them, it is only about happiness and coming out from the mundane activities of life. Yes.
See, as now Jonathan said that Hannah Pickard says that two internal and external constraints. So in external constraints, we speak about our poverty, socio-economic situations. So we want, due to that, the people can come into the category of addiction, I feel. That is a situation, I feel, the feelings that the person is going through. As if the person is in poverty, he feels like, why I am in poor situation. So those feelings can take the person into addiction, kind of like if they want to come out the situation of poverty, if you want to get some kind of relief, so the person can commit it to start drinking alcohol or smoking. So I That's why I can.
Next question. Excuse me, Father Nishant.
First of all, thank you for the nice presentations by all the 6 paper presenters. I became more and more intrigued during the conversation because all of you spoke about dopamine, right? The biological factor that can lead to some kind of addiction. But I think as philosophers, should we not have some more clarity from the point of view of the concepts that we use? All of you referred to some kind of determinism, soft, hard, compatibilism, whatever you say. But is there a difference between factors that make things possible or even lead to something, or factors that determine? Now, when you say determinism, I'm a little perplexed, particularly when Jonathan said determinism is very ideal. The difficulty comes here, then we all claim that we make free choice in life. Freedom is a word that much used here on campus, for example. We want freedom, we are free people. All those things then becomes kind of inutile claim. The second problem is then there is no possibility for any change whatsoever, whether it is neurological, biological. So would it be more appropriate to say a lack of dopamine is a factor, but how the dopamine needs to be created, it's a hormone. So how do you, that good feeling, you may get it from good sports activities, you may also get it from substance. So there is a difference, there is a choice there. So it is not dopamine is determining whether I should abuse substance. It can lead to, if you choose to. So I think there is still that place for choice. Otherwise, we can't really work for any change or social transformation, let alone the individual change. Maybe I would like you to think, all the 6 paper presenters, what would be your take on that for our own better clarity on this? Thank you.
So thank you for this insight. Yes, actually recently we had the subject philosophy of human person, and we were speaking about free will. And I totally agree with your point, where if we say that we are not in control, then human rights don't make any sense, because nobody can be held accountable or responsible. From the biological perspective, what I can say is, yes, some people are born vulnerable who can easily fall into addiction because of their genetic structure. But the story doesn't end there. So there was this TED talk also, the lady who speaks with her own 2 twins. And interestingly, what she says is, even though they are born identical twins in the same environment, still one can be more vulnerable, one can be not. And this can be an effect through generations. So they are born like that. But in spite of that, the epigenetic has a feature where it can be read. And as you rightly mentioned, if you want to change it, and if you have positive habits, like first of all, positive thoughts, good reading, exercise, good rest, and other things, then your body can read, it can command that particular cell to read that epigenetic marker in a positive way, and it can change. And that change doesn't only affect you, but it can affect future generations as well. In general, what I see is, maybe, I'm just giving an hypothesis, probably some generations of people, they fall into addiction, and the next generations, they come out of it. But after some time, as we know, the pinch, till the time it lasts, the effect remains. And then again, the person falls into it again. So that is how I see it personally. Thank you.
That can be, we can take it as a suggestion, Father, from you. I also agree to that social environment that we are thrown into the world, and the environment shapes us. Whatever we are, partly also our family backgrounds, our biological things and all have influence on our personhood and our personalities. So I find that we are into the world, and the world makes us, and these experiences that we have of addiction or using a substance, drug or anything. I think if these are not experienced, then also people will not know whether they are good or bad. And then there is always a choice that taking alcohol doesn't give me, it does give me pleasure, but it is not long lasting. So that way I find that we can experience what addiction is, but also there is a choice that we can make whether it is good or bad.
I completely agree with you, Father, what you said. And I think Kant also talked about the same thing, that the morality essentially comes from reason. And therefore, I mean, though there are circumstances which might make it completely inevitable for the person to get addicted, he still has the reasoning ability to kind of control his behavior. However, one also needs to understand that when there are certain circumstances or situations wherein a person is not able to even reason out for himself, as like reasoning is the basis for morality. However, if a person is not able to reason out, so therefore it kind of negates the possibility to change his behavior. For instance, in a society, in a hierarchical society, wherein a person is at the very bottom layer of the society, wherein he is deprived of education, deprived of all these social necessities and all the status in the society. In such a society, he is not educated, he is not made aware of what reasoning means, what education is, and how he can improve his behavior. So in such a restricted society, in order to come out of that social structure, addiction is a thing which provides him with the green wood, as Shakespeare would call it, the green wood wherein there is no social hierarchy, there are no rules, no norms, but a person is completely by himself. And in such a place, reasoning has no place. But at the same time, the person enjoys his, he enjoys his free will or whatever he can do, which is present to his will. So therefore, when we talk about morality and reasoning, we need to consider to what condition and to what strata of the society the person belongs to. So thank you.
We will have one last intervention. Over there. Please introduce yourself.
This is Cyril from final year philosophy. Thank you for the presenters, those who presented well. My question is to Brother Karis, since he posed often positive addiction and negative addiction. I don't think so. Addiction is positive, because addiction means losing oneself, depending on something. So how can it be the positive way? So I guess it's a negative. I need that clarification. And one more question is, you are distinguishing habit as well as addiction. I don't think so. But I think both are same. What the society calls, you are telling that as one a habit. What the society tells that is wrong, you are telling that addiction. I need that clarification more. Thank you.
When we talk about positive addiction and negative addiction, positive addiction is, our claim was, we consider the habits as positive addiction because habits and addiction are having both similar mechanism in terms of their repetitive nature, in terms of their unconscious or automatic nature, and in terms of their the reward mechanisms, what they get, dopamine or other impacts they got. So addiction and positive addiction or habits have only difference in their consequences or effect. These consequences can be on person himself or on others as well. So sometimes society decides which is positive habit or positive addiction or habit or negative addiction, because some say that drinking alcohol, it is a social drinking only. It is influences the it gives a certain pressure release or pleasure for the person, and it makes people social. And some say that it is having long-term physical impacts on the person itself, and sometimes if the overuse it comes, then it can socially impacts also, because person might can go out of control. So depends on the impact, we can distinguish positive addiction or habit from the negative addiction. Thank you.
There is a special request, so we'll take one last question from Father Tony.
I am Father Tony, moderator for philosophers at Papal Seminary. I am happy that this question already came up, positive and negative addictions and habits. Now, where does the prayer come? Is it a positive habit? Is it an addiction? Because we say, make a prayer a habit. No? Make a prayer your habit. Every day you pray. Make it a habit. So would you please, any one of you can throw some light on, is prayer an addiction, positive, a habit? What is it?
Okay, Father, since I'm a Jesuit, let me give an answer from an Ignatian perspective. So I would say, when we say that prayer is an addiction, so I would surely say it's an addiction, and it has, as a Jesuit, it can have negative implications, because a person addicted to prayer would not want to compromise with his other duties or with his other apostolates that he must do. But if the person is addicted, he will be kind of full time in the chapel or like praying all the time, but at the same time he's escaping. I mean, escaping is the one thing that kind of leads to addiction, and the person is escaping from his other necessary duties, and therefore I feel prayer should not become addiction. Rather, if it is taken as a habit, and habit, as Caris already mentioned, it is something that is sustainable, it is something that can be modified, that is something a person is aware of, and then person can address to it. And therefore, we must have a habit of prayer, and prayer is something essentially that will help us to get rid of other addictions, because prayer and the spiritual experiences fill up the psychological void, or fill up our experience of not being loved or being hated by the world. So with the intervention of God or spiritual experiences, that vacuum is filled in, and once that vacuum is filled in, a person does not need to seek any recourse to addiction or any other things, and therefore we should have a positive habit of prayer, but not an addiction. So it's my own perspective. Thank you, Father.
Father, thank you for your question. Actually, I was also pondering on the same question before presenting the paper, and when I came across that entire topic of epigenetics, so that time one point that I pondered is, maybe when they are speaking about positive thoughts, prayer which is done on a daily basis, I think that also creates that effect within us, and maybe that helps ourselves, because once your mind focuses on something, your entire body, all the cells that are there in your body are diverted towards that, and I think that helps for your markers to become positive. So I would agree greatly with you on that point. Just before we wind up, just one thing I'd like to say is, I'd like to apologize in one way, because I was not the original person who was supposed to present this paper, and this is not my research. There is another scholastic by the name of Shehan Tharuka. He happened to fall sick at the last moment. Right now he is writing his semesters. So that is the reason I chipped in. So all the research is his, and I would request that his name be on the paper. So I would just request you all to pray for him for his semester papers. Thank you.
Indeed, it was a meaningful discussion, and thank you everyone for your wonderful presentation and contribution. I would like to extend my gratitude towards Rocky, who was the timekeeper for this session. Over to Sister Neelima.
Thank you, Brother Joshua, for skillfully moderating the session. We take a moment to thank our timekeeper for his diligence and the presenters for their well-prepared and insightful paper. Let us give them all a round of applause. We have now come to the conclusion of the first day of SNG Day seminar. I would like to kindly remind everyone to be punctual for tomorrow's session, which will resume at 9 a.m. A gentle reminder, there is an attendance sheet kept outside. Kindly sign it. You are warmly invited for evening tea, which is being served outside the Neuner Hall. Thank you, everyone.